So we've been looking at why nations go to war all this chapter, and we've had a ton of different reasons why nations go to war. We even talked about why America went to war. We had an economy that we thought was sufficient. We had a labor force that was strong enough. We had enough fighting men to do it. And we'll talk about how, as we approach the end of chapter 7, we'll talk about how America transitioned out of war. Because the reason that we go to war, it doesn't really help us when it comes to getting out of war. And by that, what I mean is that as we exit this war, as we see the many different things that America is going to be facing as it exits this war, that underneath it all is an undercurrent of fear. And as Yoda says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And so what we're going to see here in America is an incredible amount of fear, particularly of revolution. Because let's not forget here, and as something that we'll see all across Europe as World War I was coming to an end, the nations of Europe were facing revolution. The Russian Empire faces revolution. The German Empire, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman Empire, all these nations face revolution, and it creates dramatic changes in what those nations are able to do and how those nations define themselves, who they are as a people. And America fears that. We fear that revolution for a variety of reasons, whether it's going to be strikes that we'll see take place, or riots over race, or even fear of a specific kind of revolution, a communist revolution, or even just anarchy in general, fear that people are going to want to destroy our government, just like other governments have been destroyed around Europe. So I want to start here with this particular section by looking at economic problems, because as America is done with this war, as she is basically coming out of World War I, she's going to face a series of economic problems or challenges. And we call this demobilization. When you get prepared for war, that's mobilizing something. You're getting it ready to go. And as you exit war, you are demobilizing it. So right there above my head, that's the problems that we have when we're withdrawing our economy from fighting the war. And one of the things that we're going to really see is that for workers, the average person, inflation is going to continue to rise a lot. And I know we've talked about inflation before. It's the amount of prices and how fast prices rise, and it makes the value of your dollar less. And that's going to make it really hard for workers because their cost of living, the cost that it takes them for food or shelter or anything that they need to kind of go from one day to the next, that's going to continue to go up and up and up. But their wages aren't. And this is going to make workers really angry. And I want you to actually understand that in America today, there's much of the same kind of distaste and disgust and distrust of businesses that are making a lot of money. Prices are rising, but people aren't seeing that in their wages. Now, I know we're long past 2009, but this chart definitely shows you what I want you to see, which is that in blue you have kind of the average wage of people, and this is just a simple chart from 2009 to 2013. So you can see that wages do go up a little bit from 2009 to 2013. I mean, that's a good thing, but that in red, the index of inflation is rising faster than our wages. That means that even though our wages are going up, prices are going up faster than our wages, which means we're not making as much money as we should to even meet our own costs of living. This is going to make workers now, and especially in 1918, 1919, very, very angry because they need those higher wages. So they're going to go on what's called a general strike. And the idea here is that the fear that these workers have is that they're not going to have what they need to survive. And so they have to then go on strikes. And all workers in a community, not just a certain kind of worker, like not just teachers, not just Harley-Davidson workers, not just construction workers, all types of workers in a city are going to go on strike together because everyone's suffering together. And there's just a tremendous amount of discontent that all these workers have, and they feel like they're being taken advantage of. And that fear of revolution is going to be kind of housed inside this need for strikes, because In every case in Europe, Austria-Hungary, Germany, the Russian Empire, Ottoman Empire, it was the average worker, the average person who revolts and rebels and destroys that country and creates something new. So Americans are going to see workers here beginning to follow that same pattern, and it's going to worry them. In a way, I want you to think of this worry, this fear, almost like it's a stew, right? And a stew has all kinds of vegetables and meats and starches in it, right? So we've got this big pot, and we've got these rising inflationary prices. Wages aren't going up, workers are angry, and we're throwing all this in this stew, and we're adding general strikes, and we throw that in this stew, and people are starting to get afraid, worried about revolution here in America. But there's something else we can add to this stew too that's going to continue to kind of stoke the flames out of this stew and really get people worried about revolution, and that's going to be race relations. Because that economic turmoil that hits factory owners is no longer going to be limited to just whites. Remember? What was that thing called? Do you remember what that thing was called where we had all of these African American workers moving to the north from the south? They stopped sharecropping and they were moving upwards into the north to work in those factory jobs? That great migration? Well, we have all of these African Americans that are feeling the pinch of these rising costs but not rising wages, and at the same time, these workers are having huge numbers of whites, millions of them, returning from Europe, looking for their jobs again in places like Detroit and Columbus and Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And those whites are finding that their job isn't there because there's an African American that is now in that job. And that's a big change. That's a big difference where you have people that traditionally had no problem getting a job now find someone who's in the same position, and they want their job back. So you're going to see this economic tension that African Americans are feeling pressured from two sides. On one side, African Americans have this issue of ever shrinking wages in the face of inflation, and then on the other side, we have coming here millions of whites that want their jobs back that African Americans are in thanks to the Great Migration, and that pressure that's building on African Americans, it's going to explode in a series of race riots. You're going to actually see whites begin to riot first because they've lost their jobs to African Americans, and then you're going to see blacks riot against the whites fighting back. And this is really important because really what we're seeing here for the first time are large numbers of African Americans fighting back in riots against whites over economic issues. Typically, this doesn't happen, right? Let's not forget what used to happen every time a black person decided to riot against a white person or do what a white person didn't want them to do, and that, of course, would be lynching. And you can see, lynchings here from the early 1900s. Lynchings aren't just something that's Civil War related or Ku Klux Klan related. It happens north and south, especially after World War I comes to an end, because we have so many African Americans that are really feeling the pressure of the economy as whites are returning home and they want those jobs. There's a reason why the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, is going to push for federal laws against lynching, because they're really seeing for the first time large numbers of lynchings happening north and south. And so we really want to take a look at that as another component of that stew that's making Americans afraid of revolution. And let's not forget, right, that wave of revolution, that's not an unfounded fear, right? Just on the other side of Europe, in the Soviet Union, we saw the Russian Empire fall to the Bolshevik Party, who instituted a communist dictatorship, right? We see people really freaking out about whether or not the communists are planning that here. Like, let's just ask Mr. Puppy here if that fear is valid. Mr. Puppy, is it a valid fear that Americans have that communists might want to take over here in America and create a dictatorship? Why, yes, that's very true. Oh, thank you for those kisses, little puppy. Oh, no problem, because it's pretty true that those people were really afraid that those strikes in 1919, that those were going to lead to a communist revolution here in America. What do we call that, little puppy? Oh, I'm glad you asked me that question. We call that the Red Scare. In fact, I want to be more specific. Little Dog didn't tell you that what this is actually called is the first Red Scare. It's the first Red Scare because what we're actually seeing here is, for the first time, a large group of Americans angry or afraid of one small section of the population, in this case, communists. And it's the first Red Scare. There's going to be another one later on. But this first Red Scare kind of comes as the stew of this fear kind of bubbles over, right? We had all these general strikes, and now we have these race riots. And then we have here in America a population of people who are angry at the government. We've got fear over communists. I'll give you an example. In 1919, 1920, 30 bombs were sent across the country, 30 of them, and they exploded at all kinds of places, even at the home of the Attorney General, the chief lawyer of the land, the guy in charge of enforcing the law. It happened all over the place. A bombing outside of Wall Street even happened in New York City. That's actually this picture that you can see right here. This is actually Wall Street, right outside the famous Wall Street building where a bomb went off. So terrorism here on American soil isn't new, and people were really upset about this. In fact, the FBI at the time, called the General Intelligence Division, actually said, you know what, the people who are doing this, they're probably Russians. They weren't. They were actually anarchists. They just wanted to destroy the government. But people were so afraid of communist revolution that the General Intelligence Division said that they were probably Russian. So Americans actually endorsed our FBI raiding thousands and thousands of people's homes and businesses and clubs. You can see a chart here, 1,000 arrested in New England. Reds, right? Suspected Reds now in custody. It says right over here, going to Deer Island for detention. That was an island where they were held in prison before they were sent off back to Russia, deported. So you're going to see our Attorney General Palmer actually begin A. Mitchell Palmer actually begin to send and round up people, often illegally, ignoring search warrants, not a person's right to a lawyer, and just sending them packing, sending them right back home to Russia, as a kind of a way of looking at this fear, because Americans were so worried about it. We actually ended up deporting something like nearly 600 people that we just suspected of being Russian. There was no guilt, no way we actually knew about it. There was no evidence at all that we could find, but we deported them anyway because that fear of revolution was driving us to have this Red Scare. And it was a real palpable fear that people had, that our economy was going to fall apart, our country was going to fall apart, anarchy would win. You can see here the torches of anarchy. It would destroy our country, and that we would become communists like this little commie right here. So we had to fight back against that. And that fight didn't just happen as we rounded up all these people that we just thought might have been Reds and sent packing. It expressed itself in the election of 1920. Woodrow Wilson said he wasn't going to run for a third term, so the Democrats nominated James Cox, who was a progressive, and he said, I'm going to continue these progressive ideas that we've talked about before. And the Republicans nominate Warren G. Harding, and Warren G. Harding made a very interesting argument. He said, let's just think back, right? We think back about progressivism, and it's led us to all of this economic turmoil. We've got all these general strikes. We've got all these race riots. We've got all these immigrants coming into our country, all these Russian immigrants, possibly communists. It's going to overthrow us, maybe sending bombs across the country. We got World War I, millions of Americans going off to fight World War I. What good is any of that? Why would we want progressivism? I mean, Americans are tired of progressivism, and Warren G. Harding recognizes that. He says, look, what we need more than anything else is a return to what he calls normalcy. He says our need as Americans, we don't need any more kind of crazy heroics. We don't need any more crazy reforms of government or any of that nonsense. What we need is to heal as a country. We don't need some sort of fake medicine or what he calls a nostrum. That's what a nostrum is. It's like a fake medicine. What we really need is normalcy. We just need things to go back to the way they were. No more revolutions, no more change. What we need is restoration. We need to go back. We need to restore what America used to be like. We need to go back to that way we used to be before progressivism, back to the age of the Second Industrial Revolution, when people had jobs and things weren't like this. And this idea of normalcy, that really hits with voters. And they elect him in a landslide. You can see here in red everything that Warren G. Harding won. Even states that typically were Democratic, like Tennessee, Warren G. Harding will win. West Virginia, Warren G. Harding will win. So Americans really felt like they were done with the crazy ups and downs, topsy-turvy nature of progressivism, and that they really needed something a little bit calmer. And Warren G. Harding is going to provide them with that, they hope. Anyway, and we'll talk more about that next chapter.